Hi, today we are talking about the 2025 benchmarking report. Now, this is a new report. It's the first one we've ever done, and it's an accumulation of the last 3 years of data, looking at benchmarking numbers within the sector and what people are averaging costs on across the board. I'm joined today by my colleague, Sarah Wood. For those of you who don't know Sarah, she is our buyer account manager. She spends all day, every day talking to our buyers, talking to them about what they're looking for, helping them find the right settings, and also explaining the numbers to them as well. The thing with benchmarking is that lots of people talk about benchmarking and it's almost like this is where you should be. Now, the thing about this particular sector is there's no actual kind of hard and fast benchmarking information out there. You sometimes get some bodies who will give out information within particular sectors as a comparison, but actually it's quite hard to find comparable data as to how your nursery kind of works alongside others and what your numbers look like. But one of the things is we use the word comparable, but it's not about comparisons. And that's something you have to remember when you're looking at these numbers. All your settings are unique. So actually your numbers are going to be unique as well. And it may be that actually you don't fit within the actual benchmarking numbers that we're looking at for staffing. And that's fine. If your numbers are higher, there may be a reason why that's the case. It may be you have more one-to-ones, or it might be something you're doing within the business that requires that. As long as you can see it and see why and know where the business supports it or where you're saving costs in other places, it doesn't matter. So this isn't this is where your numbers should be. This is purely about giving you the information so you can see what other people are doing.
So with this report, Leah, where does the data actually come from?
So what we've done is we've taken all the valuations we've completed in the last 3 years and essentially compared all the numbers. So we can see year on year how things have changed. So that was a huge amount of valuations. So we can really see how practices have changed over the last 3 years. From your point of view, Sarah, this is really important from a buyer's point of view. This isn't just aimed at sellers. This is something that everyone within the market should be able to use. Because for most buyers, when you're looking at a nursery, especially if you're relatively new to the sector, you look at some of the numbers and they actually appear quite scary. As in staffing costs, as a general rule, our staff costs are massive. And actually, if you're not used to that, it is going to be quite overwhelming. So it's really useful from the buyer's perspective to see kind of how other nurseries are running. And when you're looking at a target nursery, you can kind of see where actually there might be places you can make gains. You can increase the profitability in EBITDA, or areas where maybe actually costs are running a bit low or you might have to invest. So it's really worth keeping an eye on it as a buyer as well as being a seller. The interesting thing about this is that actually you see a lot of bad news in the press. And I think sometimes it feels like every day there's more bad news about staffing or more bad news about funding. Sometimes it does feel a bit negative. But actually, one thing I've loved about looking at this data is that overall it has been quite positive, which is so nice. It's nice to be able to say this is good news. Overall turnovers are rising year on year. We're finding actually the staffing costs are easing. And we all know that obviously recruitment has eased. It's never going to be easy, but it has eased. We're also finding obviously funding is going up. And actually, I think the impact of funding has been more impactful than people thought it was going to be. I think people thought it wasn't going to add to the turnover quite so much. And then also, we're seeing the impact of higher occupancy across all settings as well. So as I say, overall, it's been a positive thing.
So where do the numbers come from then, Leah? Let's talk about the numbers.
So as I say, we've accumulated a huge amount of valuations over the last 3 years. But something we should clarify before we kind of get deep into numbers is what they relate to. So when we talk about valuations, what you have to remember with accounts is when someone gets their accounts, they're already out of date by the time they've got them.
They are.
So we're currently almost at the end of 2025. A lot of people don't have their 25 accounts yet. Tax isn't due till January. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But actually, we know also the sector changes so rapidly.
It does.
So actually looking back to what would have been the beginning of April 2024 is not going to give us an idea of what's going on now. So when we're talking about years, you've got to remember that when I'm talking about 2023, I was probably valuing on 2022 accounts. When I'm talking about 2024, they were probably 23 accounts and so on and so forth. What we do when we value, though, is we also look at what's going on within the setting now. And it's really important when you're doing a valuation that you see what's going on there. You can value on accounts, and that's great. But it's going to tell you what was going on in the business then, not now. So when I'm talking about projected figures, what I'm talking about is when I'm going into a business now, I'm saying, where are we at this moment in time? Now, these numbers aren't going to appear on a set of accounts until next year. But actually, this is what we're expecting to see when those March 26th accounts finally appear. The first one we've looked at is turnover. and turnover is always where we start. And actually, again, it's been fascinating to look at because we've seen year on year that nurseries have had double-digit growth in turnover, which is fantastic to see. So between 23 and 24, we had about 51.62% increase in turnover. Now that sounds massive, but you've got to remember 23 was the 22 accounts turning into COVID. Let's not talk about that. We're past it. Let's move on. You've also got the 24 to 25. We had an increase of 36.74%. And then when we look at the projected numbers for next year, so this will be the March 26 accounts, working on what we're looking at the moment, we're looking at an increase of at least 10.41%. Now, I say at least because actually we think that is likely to be a bit higher. Because what we've got to remember is that we haven't yet seen the impact of things like the September funding increase. We've seen the others kind of come through gradually, but we're only a couple of months into that. It's not showing yet. So you're going to see, we're expecting that to actually be a little bit higher.
Why is that though? Why do we have an increase?
I think a lot of people would sort of say, well, it's obviously because, fees have gone up, and everyone's increased their fees substantially over the years. And also we've had an increase in funding as well. And yes, that is part of it, but that's not the be all and end all. Actually, when we look at income per place, we can see that actually in 2023, the average income per place per setting was about £6,918. Whereas actually when we got to 2025, we're now at 10,348. And again, yes, an increase in funding. But what we've also seen is that people are being a lot more strategic about how they manage their nurseries now. We've come out of COVID and everyone talks about the midweek bump. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, everyone wants childcare. No one wants it Monday and Tuesday because they're working from home.
I'm still waiting for a Thursday slot.
So actually, what that means is that people have had to look a lot closer at how they manage their sessions. Because actually what you've got is lots of staff either end of the week and a need for more in the middle of the week. And it means that a lot of the flexibility, sadly, has been gone. You see less and less nurseries now that will offer, incredible flexible funded hours. It's more likely you're going to have people who say they have to have minimum days because more than ever, people are aware that those hours need to be filled. And actually, if you've got someone who's only taking a short portion of it, trying to fit him around the edge, So I think a lot of that has come from actually real focus on full-time equivalents across the board as well. So we're seeing that in the occupancy numbers as well. So, the average occupancy in 2023 was about 44.43%. It dipped slightly in 2024, so down to about 43.13%. But actually in 2025, it's skyrocketed to 58.17%. So obviously that is a massive increase. Projecting for next year, we're currently looking at between 62 to 63%.
Occupancy is a minefield, isn't it?
It can be a minefield.
But how's it calculated?
Well, that's the problem, is that actually when you talk to people about their occupancy, often you get we're full. And actually when we sit and do the numbers, and you all know this yourself, we sit there and kind of go, well, actually, we calculate your occupancy to be here instead. And suddenly it's like, oh, that can't be right. Hang on a second. But the problem with occupancy is that it can be quite hard to calculate. So this is a very rough figure. And it has to be that way because it's based purely on, the average income per day per child and how that spreads over the year, opening pattern and everything like that. So it doesn't take into account fluctuations maybe between funding rates and day rates and things like that. It can be a little bit tricky to pinpoint. The most important thing is obviously it's going up. Occupancy within a setting, and when we ask for it for calculation for valuation, and also when a buyer asks for it for information when they're looking to buy, is so important. And you really need to be utilising your systems to try to get as much kind of accuracy as possible. No one is ever going to be 100% full. Never. It's just not possible. But actually it's about really kind of breaking down the numbers and seeing how that looks, and also being very aware of the changes term on term. Because I think you've probably found, we get occupancy data and it's a snapshot of what was happening last week. And that's great. But maybe not so great at the beginning of September when everyone's gone off to school and you're waiting to fill up your numbers again. So ideally what you want to be able to do is show a snapshot throughout the year. So maybe like 1 week per half term and then a week in summer to really give an idea across the board.
Do you know, most of the buyers now, they're asking for up to 3 years previous date.
Exactly, because they want to see how it's changed. And they're also going to know, actually, not just where are you now, but what are you registered for next year? Because we talk to most nurseries and they say, well, we're taking registrations on babies that aren't even conceived yet. And actually it's like, well, great. What have we got? What do we know is pretty much locked down? How's that going to look for us? So it's something that as a figure, it can be faffy and it can be quite confusing, but it's so worth getting an understanding of. And it's just another example of actually all these operational numbers that have a direct link back to the financial numbers. It's not just the numbers on your accounts, it's about all the other things as well.
So what costs have you looked at?
Well, the first thing that we looked at is the cost of sales, of course, the largest of which is your staff costs. Now, this is the cost that anyone from outside the sector looks at and just has a bit of a heart attack, because it's always so
Scares
huge.
everybody.
Absolutely. And interestingly, it is one of those ones that you do actually have some benchmarking information for. So the general kind of stat you get is your benchmarking for staffing should be between 55 and 60%. And that is pretty correct, to be honest. However, you know, there are group buyers out there who will automatically always assume that staff costs should not run higher than 50%. And then there's others who would assume they want to be higher. And this goes back to what I was saying about not comparing yourself. Again, your staff costs may be higher than this for absolute good reason. You know, don't beat yourself up about it. I think one of the biggest things people say to me when I say your staff costs are too high is, well, I can't lose staff. I need staff, I need them for the ratios. And that's always the concern. But I would obviously say it's very rare that when I'm looking at a setting that a high staff cost is because there are too many staff or they are being paid too much. That's not two things you come across in this sector really at all. Often it's operational things. And again, it's tying back to those other numbers. It's about staff deployment. It's about actually, do you have that point either end of the week where you've got too many staff and not enough kids? When it comes to actually someone resigning, should you replace like for like, or should you actually be looking for someone who maybe is a bit more flexible and can move hours around? I'm never going to turn around and say to someone, you have too many staff, you need to fire half of them. That's not going to happen. If anything, you know, if you've got the qualified staff now, as we all know, you hold on to them. You really do. But actually, it's often an indicator that there's other issues there. And that's why the staff cost is higher. So if your staff cost is higher and you are worried about it, that's where I'd always recommend you look. But again, going back to what I was saying about the positivity, actually, in reality, looking at the stats, despite the recent concerns about things like employers' NI and national minimum wage and whatnot, staff costs are actually doing very well across the board. So, you know, in 24, the staff costs were running at about an average of about 53.96%. In 25, they went up to about 55.56%. And there's going to be a 1.59% projected increase, we're thinking, on the 26 numbers, which will take us up to 55.72%. So that is, you know, actually fantastic. And although everyone was very concerned about the employers' NI and the national minimum wage, and of course we haven't seen a full year impact of that yet, the general feeling is most places have actually increased their fees to offset that. You know, and obviously the increased funding is assisted as well. So while we all kind of had a collective gasp and thought that actually this 55-60% is not going to be feasible anymore, it is working.
It's not too much of a reason for concern.
Exactly. And yes, we don't know yet what the autumn budget is going to say. We know there will be an increase next year, though it won't be to the same extent. But, you know, same as every year, they go up, you find ways to accommodate it. It's not the end of the world. And as I say, if it is that you're pushed beyond there, it may be that there's other places you can make savings anyway.
So number heavy, isn't it?
I know it is number heavy. It really is. Luckily, I'm a bit of a numbers geek, so I love this. But yeah, I know it can be a little bit. And also, people do get worried when they start talking numbers and how their numbers compare. So again, don't compare yourself. Don't worry about it. Another cost of sales we're looking at is things like your purchases and your food. Now, when we talk about cost of sales, is a cost that's considered to automatically increase as your turnover increases. So things like your rent, light, heat, stuff like that, that should largely stay the same. But actually, if you've got more children and more turnover, you have more children who also need feeding. So your food cost is going to go up and it's expected to increase. Now, in reality, we've actually seen a very small dip. So in the 2025 accounts, it was coming in at about just over 5%. And now we're sitting about 4.5% of gross fees.
Okay, why is that then?
A couple of reasons. Again, there's been an increase in fees. You know, I think a lot of people have spent the last few years streamlining a lot. Most nursery businesses, there's not a lot of wastage nowadays. So, you know, food costs are going down, though it doesn't always feel like it, you know, things like that. So overall, though, it's pretty steady and you really shouldn't be looking to go beyond that ideally. Again, you know, if you have all organic produce from the local butcher and a Michelin-starred chef, yes, the chances are your food costs are going to be a little bit higher, but that is your unique selling point. So, you know, if it works for you, keep it. But it is something that, you know, you want to be keeping an eye on. And I will add that actually on the set of accounts, from a seller's point of view, when you're running your accounts, always think of it as anything above the gross profit line on your accounts, your buyer will assume has to be an ongoing cost and has to increase in line with turnover. Which means that if you're putting things in there like a one-off massive equipment purchase of garden equipment that you're only going to have to replace every 25 years, they're going to assume that cost is going to be needed year on year out. Work with your accountant to make sure that costs are split out so you can see if there are one-off costs in there, because trust me, it will help your valuation and help your buyer support what they're looking to buy as well. So do kind of always look at that. Always assume anything above the gross profit line. Try not to put anything that's a one-off cost or a personal cost in there, like your Tesco shop, because otherwise your buyer's going to assume that they need to keep paying it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What about other costs?
Well, I mean, overall, obviously, we've had this gives us quite an average gross profit of about 40%. But yes, other costs, your incidental costs, these are things that, I'd say, largely shouldn't change. And often, people forget about these. So things like your rent, as I say, year on year doesn't change massively. But it's quite hard to do benchmarking on this because actually, in reality, if you have a property in London, your rent is likely to be a lot higher than if you have a similar sized property in Cumbria. So it's very hard to say, well, this should be X% of your fees. However, this is one of those areas that actually is really, really easy to make small but significant gains, cumulative gains overall. So it shouldn't be an area that you don't look at. When it comes to things like electricity providers, telephone systems, stuff like that, we all know, as we do in our own lives, that you should be shopping around regularly. And we're all guilty of going, oh yeah, I really should shop around and change my supplier at some point. Try to get into the habit of doing that annually and you will see a marked difference, and it all helps. And it means that if you do have that slightly higher staff cost or that Michelin-starred chef, then actually you can afford to pay for that because you're saving money elsewhere. So it's well worth doing.
Where is this Michelin star chef nursery that you talk about? Because I think my child's eating fish fingers for £80 a day.
Well, I mean, I do actually know one that had a Michelin-starred chef, but as they were very quick to tell me, that may be the case, but we're still not allowed to use too much salt. So there's only so much flavour you can create. So, I mean, overall, what this has left us with is actually more profitable nurseries. So that's the be all and end all. And, that's what we're looking to achieve here. Obviously, all these numbers together, what they mean actually is great news, more profitable nurseries. So again, this is positive news. It's nice to hear. And actually, things maybe aren't as bleak as some people would tell you they are. So, I mean, the average EBITDA in 2023 for a nursery was running about 18.34% of the total income. That actually increased to 26.17% in 2024, but you've got to remember 2024 would have been 23 accounts. And actually a lot of people found that with elements of furlough and other COVID things going on there, that actually their accounts look surprisingly profitable that year. So that is something that, you have to take into account there. 2025, we dropped back down to 22.75%, and projected for next year, we're coming in at about 24.5%. Now, I say projected, again, you need to think about things like the September funding, not in there yet, but actually, it's looking healthy. That's the key thing. Overall, businesses are more profitable across the board. And of course, that is what is causing the market to grow. Buyers want to get into nurseries because they are profitable businesses.
Yeah.
Even if every day, some days it doesn't feel like it. And I know some days it doesn't feel like it.
It's very rewarding.
They are very, very profitable businesses. And obviously, if you're working on your numbers and you understand your numbers, hopefully they can be even more so as well.
So what can people do with this data?
As I said, one of the key things is don't compare yourself. The report goes into a lot more depth than I do now, but it's very, very good for just giving you a good idea of kind of where other people are at this moment in time. One thing the report also has is like benchmarking in action. So it gives you like a real example of actually if this nursery, which we went to see, kind of changed these bits and made this and took this advice, where would they be if they were now in line with the benchmarking? And actually you see real gains in the space of about 18 months in true business value. And that's not to say just also the gains you get in the day-to-day profitability as well. And hopefully, a more efficient and all-round better business. That's what we're aiming for. So what people can do is they can go to the website and download the report and see it all in full there. There's also on the website a benchmarking calculator. So if you are curious as to how your numbers stack up, you can go in, plug in some basic information from your accounts. You do not need to sign up or kind of give that information to us permanently. It purely runs as a calculator, but it will show you where you stand. And if it is that you look at it and think, well, hang on a second, I don't know why that's high, do give us a call. We're more than happy to have a chat with you and see kind of where the differences lie and what the numbers look like. So I really hope you guys found that interesting and useful. I say please download the report from the website. There will also be paper copies available at shows when we're at in the future. And obviously you're more than welcome to give us a call or drop us an email anytime to have a chat about it. If you've got any questions, ping them across, give us a call or drop them in the comments below, and we'll see you again soon.